Why did communist China get richer than democratic India? In the middle of the 20th century, two great civilizations rose from humiliation. Both poor, both traumatized by foreign rule, both determined to build a future worthy of their glorious past. One chose the ballot, the other chose bullets. Most of us grew up believing that democracy, liberty, and freedom inevitably lead to prosperity. And being American, I saw that firsthand in my life. But I'm also Indian by ancestry. And when you look at how a free, secular, democratic India fared, the results were very different. Across the Himalayas, China chose a different path. It chose communism. And for a long time, it was regarded as a forgotten failure. But things started to shift in the 21st century. People started to mock it, and not just for being a failure, but seemingly just trying to get better. People said it could only copy the West, that its culture was inferior, that its success was a sham. And yet, China kept rising, relentlessly. Today, it is undeniable. India, by contrast, has only recently begun to accelerate. For most of its post-independence history, it languished in poverty. As late as 2014, roughly 40% of the country still defecated in the open. This was not the destiny imagined for a democracy of 1 billion people. So in this tale, we are going to examine what went terribly wrong with India, as well as what went fantastically right with China. And it's going to lead to some controversial conclusions. This is a story of how China beat India. There are many reasons why India lags China today, but first let's start with economics. While China embraced revolutionary communism and later pivoted to free markets, India adopted a more moderate but much more en vogue idea: socialism. Independence-era leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru, India's first prime minister, saw socialism as the solution to colonialist exploitation, which he linked to capitalism. And there's some truth here. Indian industries had been obliterated by the parasitism of the British Raj, but the Raj didn't practice capitalism with free markets. Rather, it conducted economic decimation and then extraction. Textiles is a great example of this. The British heavily taxed local Indian textile production and then double taxed it with a tariff upon entry to Britain. Thus, the industry that drove the British to conquer India was destroyed. This was not capitalism. This was free markets for me, but not for thee. Either way, India's early leaders saw capitalism, which became synonymous with economic extraction, as a tool of the empire, and socialism as a moral liberation. As India's first prime minister, Nehru heavily pushed a state-directed command and control economy. Nehru would label profit as a dirty word, and placed heavy and emerging industry under government control. This was the birth of something called the License Raj, where India's cumbersome bureaucracy held its businesses by paper point. Endless permits, clearances, and signatures were needed to do basic things like start a business or even buy a TV. The empowering of a crazy bureaucracy is not a new thing though. A lot of institutions of the Republic of India, like the bureaucracy and judiciary, two extremely arcane and obtuse systems, are direct descendants of the British Raj. They are structured to be used by the ruling elite to lord over the poor and rambunctious masses. Their aim is enacting control over subjects, not giving justice or freedom to citizens. So both the bureaucracy and judiciary were hand in glove with Nehru's idea of a socialist economy. They would aid in creating roadblocks to business, entrepreneurship, and innovation. And the rich, who had industrial ties, would stay in power through the corruption and low competition enabled by socialism. There was no economic pressure to compete from the free market. All they had to do was pay their regular hafta, or bribe, to politicians. This led to the politicians in power, chiefly Nehru's family, to become increasingly corrupt. Nehru's daughter, Indira Gandhi, would soon take over the Indian National Congress Party and prime ministership itself. India's democracy became a family affair. She would double down on Nehru's socialism with bank nationalizations, populist redistribution, and even a 97.5% tax rate for India's highest income earners. Threatened with losing power, Indira suspended democracy, declaring the emergency, in which she further spread the tentacles of the state over India's markets. She even inserted the words socialist and secular into the Indian constitution, forcibly. Check out this graph showing the anemic economic growth that India had during these socialist years, especially during Indira's. At that time, India was eclipsed by its neighbor Pakistan in growth, as India continued to stagnate with socialism. Decades of socialism would bring India to the brink. Politicians would continue to blame the rich and powerful in rallies during the day, but snooze and schmooze with them at parties during the night. A bribe from the rich and a vote from the poor. It was a pretty sweet deal. But the party would soon stop, and it came from one of the most unlikeliest of sources, the Middle East. In August of 1990, Saddam Hussein led a massive invasion into the Gulf state of Kuwait. Oil prices immediately skyrocketed, and India, who heavily depended on imported oil, immediately felt the heat. Its foreign exchange reserves began melting. India was already suffering from chronic deficits, super low economic growth, and a bouquet of other financial maladies. The Indian economy began to collapse. The International Monetary Fund came in to save the day with a bailout, but it came with a condition. India had to open up and liberalize its economy, taking a leap away from socialism and finally embracing elements of free market capitalism. With the bailout plus these reforms, India could repair its balance sheet and pay back the IMF. Commentators frequently credit the Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao and Finance Minister Manmohan Singh with these reforms, and they deserve big credit for their execution. But they were forced. There's no two ways about it. Rao was not reading Adam Smith at bedtime, and Singh was previously a key cog in Indira's socialist experiment. Later, when Singh became PM himself, he did not enact more market reforms. Instead, he shifted back to socialism. Either way, these reforms were massively beneficial for India. While many socialist policies and decades of a socialist mentality remained, the Indian people finally remembered that they worship a goddess of wealth, and India's economy started to bounce back. Credit should be given to the Indian people who finally embraced the spirit of capitalism. A good example is the IT sector, which many experts say succeeded so much because government bureaucrats couldn't understand this new industry, so they kept their hands off of it. Less government regulation meant more growth in that sector. Still, the shadow of socialism loomed large. Reformers like P.V. Narasimha Rao and later Atal Bihari Vajpayee were thrown out of office. For economic reforms can be scary to the masses, especially those addicted to socialism. Ideas like reforms will only benefit the rich, or they will shake up their sector, leading to job losses, are very understandable. So India snapped back to socialism in 2004 as the gains of Vajpayee's reforms were swallowed for more subsidies. A shining Indian economy would sink into what economists call a fragile five economy by 2014, with double-digit inflation and a balance sheet that was crashing out. Something had to be done. Okay, I think we've been cooking up this Indian part of the story long enough. Now is the time to switch to the Chinese side. Let's go on a journey to the Middle Kingdom. In the early 20th century, China was a broken land. Emerging from a century of humiliation at the hands of foreigners, the winds of revolution spanned across the countryside. China had historically had periods of unification, fragmentation, and then reunification, and so on. Now, it was just coming out of a fragmentation phase. Previously, it was carved up by foreign powers, Western and Japanese, and torn apart by feudal warlords. From this fractured polity came two factions, the nationalists and the communists. Both were technically nationalists in that they wanted to create a united China, but the communists, led by the upstart peasant leader named Mao Zedong, wanted the newly unified state to practice communism. Like Nehru, Mao viewed capitalism as a foreign imposition and a cause for the century of humiliation that the Chinese faced. After a bloody civil conflict, Mao destroyed the nationalists. Now, ironically, was the time to build a nation. He declared the formation of the People's Republic of China in 1949. A red dawn rose over the east. Mao looked to the Soviet Union for inspiration. China would be built through Soviet-style 5-year plans, national goals for agriculture, industry, and production. The first 5-year plan was pretty successful, at least on paper. With Soviet advisors and loans, steel and coal output nearly doubled. Railways expanded. China's first hydroelectric plants were made. Cities like Wuhan and Anshan became industrial centers. Sounds great, right? But the thing is, there's some key differences between the USSR and China. When the USSR conducted their 5-year plans, they already inherited an industrial base with proper industrial centers, infrastructure, and intellectual capital. The Soviet Union was a massive country, but its population was more concentrated in urban centers. China did not have any of the above. 80 to 90% of the population were rural peasants, including Mao himself. The Soviet Union's inherited industrial and intellectual capital was buttressed by massive amounts of natural resources like coal, iron, and oil already being extracted. A rural China was more concerned with basics like grains. Mao not recognizing these disparities would lead to catastrophe. Mao launched the Great Leap Forward in 1958. The goal was to push Chinese grain and steel production greater than Great Britain's, the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution and preeminent world power at the time. Mao abolished private farming, collectivizing plots and villages into 20 to 30,000 person communes. Farmers no longer owned their land or crops, the government did. This killed any incentive to farm diligently and erased accountability. And to make that massive leap forward in steel production, makeshift backyard furnaces were built on farmland as directed by communes who didn't really understand the mechanics of steel smelting or raising crops. Remember when I told you that those 5-year plans looked good on paper? Well, that's because Mao's communes were lying about their steel and grain production. When central government officials went to commune storage sites, they would be met with useless lumps of metal and empty grain silos, and they in turn would lie to their superiors. This chain of lies was due to the fact that Mao had a habit of declaring those who passed along bad news as traitors. Officials who reported that communes were not working and that their comrades were lying would be brutally tortured and killed for being seen as traitors to Marxism, to China, to Mao. Communes also competed to gain favor in the highly centralized Communist Party. Communes who reported good news and production would be held in high esteem and their officials promoted. Those who reported bad news would be punished. The end result of this was a massive famine. People began to eat bark and clay. Families sold children because they couldn't feed them. Devastated villages were cordoned off to avoid spreading bad morale. As a result, 20 to 45 million Chinese died, the largest famine in human history, greater than all of World War I's battlefield deaths combined. Mao had to either solve this problem or absolve himself. He chose the latter. As rivals closed in, Mao declared the Cultural Revolution. He claimed the bourgeoisie elements had betrayed the communist cause and that a purge had to be done within the Communist Party. He called on China's youth to rise up against their corrupt elders and destroy the 4 olds: old ideas, old culture, old customs, and old habits. Ancient Chinese arts, literature, and even cultural elements like Confucian ethics and traditions were attacked relentlessly. It was basically wokeism on steroids. Children sent their parents to labor and re-education camps. Students smashed centuries-old statues. Books were burnt at universities. Temples were sacked. In this mayhem, Mao would accuse his rivals of treason and use this energized base of youth to justify centralizing his party. A further 1 to 3 million people died from political killings, executions, and persecutions. By the time Mao died in 1976, China was a broken society with a teetering state. The revolution had devoured itself. But out of the ashes, one man, a certain Deng Xiaoping, would rise to the occasion. Deng Xiaoping was a quiet revolutionary. Part of the more moderate wing of the CCP, Deng survived multiple purges by Mao, who deemed people like Deng as capitalist traitors. Deng wasn't as strident in his Marxism. He famously quipped that he doesn't care if a cat is white or black, as long as it catches mice. After taking power in 1978, Deng embarked on a project he called Socialism with Chinese Characteristics. In reality, it wasn't as much about Chinese characteristics as it was about wrapping capitalism in Chinese attire. His first experiment started with a crime: In the rural Anhui province, farmers secretly divided their commune land amongst families and kept private surpluses of their plots after meeting their communal quota. Upon discovery, party leaders encouraged punishment, but instead Deng legalized this practice. Soon enough, Deng expanded this and more agricultural reforms to bring private industry, ownership, and profit to China's farms. Food shortages vanished, and grain stocks exploded. Next, he did this with industry, but this proved much more difficult. Industrial production requires a lot more resources, investment, and intellectual capital. Many CCP officials were still wary of the agricultural reforms as they believed peasant success would give way to capitalist greed. So Deng started slow. In the southern realms of China, Deng carved out special economic zones, or SEZs. Small fishing villages like Shenzhen would have relaxed labor laws, incentives for foreign investment, and subsidies for industry. Various southern cities took on these reforms. Deng called it crossing the river by feeling the stones, a metaphor to give CCP hardliners ease that reforms would be done slow and small until a proper economic way was found to achieve prosperity. Many CCP stalwarts were initially angry at what they saw as betrayal. But as these cities grew, envy replaced anger, and envy soon enough gave way to awe. The creed of capitalism began to spread. More and more Chinese cities and regions adopted Deng's reforms. China grew quickly, an average of about 9% real GDP growth per year during Deng's roughly 14 years of leadership. However, everything was not rosy. Growth was turbulent, some years as high as 15%, other years as low as 4%. Additionally, economic inclusion fueled demands for political inclusion, something Deng answered with an iron fist at the infamous Tiananmen Square incident. Deng's crackdown may have killed thousands of protesters. And it's here we have to really stop and meditate on this. Deng's reforms lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. But Deng could only do so because China was an authoritarian country. And even beyond the simple fact that China was a dictatorship, Deng benefited a lot from Mao crushing most other rivals. Single-party states usually have factions within them that compete. Think the court drama in Game of Thrones. The fact that Mao cleaned house in the Communist Party meant that there weren't as many strong factions for Deng himself to contend with. Deng surviving Mao's purges meant he had a green field in front of him. This ability to act extremely decisively, something kind of missing in democracy, is something we're going to talk about later. Deng would be followed by a series of stabilizing leaders who continued his work, again under the aegis of one-party rule. Jiang Zemin began to open China to the world, taking advantage of globalization as China became the world's factory. He integrated China's emerging capitalist class into official CCP meetings and positions. Jiang put even more effort into infrastructure as China was rapidly urbanizing. After Jiang came Hu Jintao, who brought a lot of stability to China as he reintroduced social welfare into the equation. Capitalism does lead to inequality, and the Chinese public and CCP itself began to murmur about the ideals of Marxism. Hu particularly focused on healthcare and education of China's rural areas, which had been overshadowed by its urban boom. It's under Hu's watch that the 2008 Beijing Olympics occurred. These were not just some random sports event. This was China's coming out party to the world. And not in like a gay way, but that's cool if that's your thing. I mean coming out in terms of showing their achievements to the world. The world saw the development and prosperity China had achieved. Stereotypes about poor Chinese villages gave way to a modern, thriving economy. After Hu Jintao is Xi Jinping, who has continued the pivot back to more classical Marxism, but also really launched China into the 21st century in terms of technology, military, and economic power. China became a truly global hard power with Xi. To be honest, I think Xi Jinping kind of got like a platinum platter because of the reforms that Deng, Jiang, and Hu did. But he deserves a lot of credit for nurturing and preserving these reforms and guiding China into the 21st century. So I think you get the picture. China has done really well. Now the question becomes though, why can't India do these big changes and radical reforms? Both China and India are major Asian civilizations. They suffered under foreign imperialism. They tried experiments with Marxism. They have over 1 billion people and their diasporas are very successful. So why does China succeed but India does not, at least as much? Here's where we get controversial. It's time to talk about democracy. In 1950, India became a republic and adopted a Westminster-style parliamentary democracy, an astonishing jump for a poor, nearly decolonized nation. Democracy was viewed as an Indian value, with allusions to early democratic systems in ancient India, and even integral to the founding story of India, where King Bharat, who the country is named after, passed over his children to give kingship to the popular yet humble son of a sage. Many Indians point to this as the birth of democracy in India. But the early republic's democracy functioned exactly how you would expect in a poor country. Ballot stuffing, corruption, even violence. But there's an element here that makes Indian democracy particularly vibrant. I'd say blinding to outsiders even. India is probably the most diverse country in the world. Thousands of castes, hundreds of languages, dozens of ethnicities, and all the religions in the world are found in India. In a parliamentary democracy, this infinite diversity often produces a form of feudal representation, where politicians serve only their specific castes and communities, not all citizens. Parliamentary democracy was more designed for homogeneous places like 19th century England or the Netherlands, where sure, there were some differences between groups and classes, but they didn't have this infinite diversity that India has. So in India, each identity group has their own constituency. Many people will only vote for someone from their own identity group, whether that is their caste, their linguistic identity, religion, or some combo of all of the above. This means that political parties have to spend immense energy constructing these identity-based coalitions rather than finding the best person for the job. This also leads to a patronage system in parliament. Many of the representatives in parliament, whether at the center but especially state level, are literal gangsters. Like they have ordered hits, are super corrupt, and are hilariously uncouth, but they are the right caste, ethnic or religious combination. Plus, they have the money and muscle to make people vote. Yes, I mean for large parts of India's democratic history, people threatened others to vote and they captured vote booths. Or they just paid them. Today, the violence has mostly faded, but the transactional politics remain. Cash transfers, subsidies, and welfare schemes are the principal currency of loyalty. Sometimes to break these ironclad identity coalitions, the best way is to just convert people through cash. These things all distort democracy. Instead of devoting energy and capital for things like infrastructure, education, defense, research, literally everything you'd invest in if you were playing like Civilization or something, India's politicians would instead do things like endlessly adding quotas, throwing money at whichever caste, or allowing some rioters to go scot-free because they belong to a religion that votes for them. And for most of India's history, this is just what democracy was, and even still is today. But do you remember that statistic I told you at the beginning of the video? It was shocking. It was shameful. I told you that even by 2014, 40% of Indians still defecated in the open. Yeah, the classic poop joke, you could get it out of your system, I get it. Well, now it's pretty much zero. Think about it. For 7 decades, Indian politicians didn't care about this basic issue and complete absence of basic dignity for so many Indians. But then in 2014, someone came along that did. In the future, this man may be known as India's Deng Xiaoping, Jiang Zemin, and or Hu Jintao, perhaps all rolled into one. Let's talk about Narendra Modi and why India is finally catching up to China. Narendra Modi is a very controversial figure in the world, but in India, he's popular. Very popular, in fact. Consistently receiving above 60 to 70% approval ratings in a nation of 1.5 billion is no easy feat. Now, I made a video on why Modi is so popular earlier, so you can watch that, it's in the description, but we're not going to focus as much on that. We're going to focus on maybe how he resembles Deng, Jiang, and Hu, and why this impacts India so profoundly. The big theme of Modi is increasing state capacity. India is a place that for thousands of years has had a strong society, but relatively weaker state. Due to Indian diversity, the state would have to interface with different groups and navigate ruling through consensus rather than radical change. Modi has had to do the same thing in democracy. But there is a decisiveness and strategy that Modi has used to make a real difference in India. Firstly, India has undergone a massive digitization and formalization drive. Through a series of incentives, public-private partnerships, and even some controversial policies, Modi has pushed Indians to transition to digital payments and financial formalization. That means India's tax base has expanded dramatically, giving the government new muscle for investment. So the people probably are pretty pissed that they have to pay more taxes, right? Well, Modi used these funds for things like infrastructure as well as more welfare. Modi has had to play the ball in democracy too. And actually, the welfare delivered is much more direct with less leakages these days because it's been digitized and Indians have access to bank accounts and digital IDs for security. Building toilets, tap water connections, electricity lines, gas cylinders, and so much more are key to this. An infrastructure boom and reforms to ease business also have made a big impact. However, Modi has had his challenges. Because India is a democracy, he has had to back down on big reforms in labor and agriculture. Early in his term, he had to tame double-digit inflation and a very bad balance sheet he inherited from the previous administration. That meant growth rates haven't been as high as China during their boom. So to circumvent this, Modi has taken a page from Deng's book. The central government incentivizes state governments to enact those much-needed land, labor, and agricultural reforms so that they can display the fruits of capitalism to other states. As a result, you're starting to see large disparities in growth rates between states. The good news is even opposition states are starting to bend the knee to reforms as they can't ignore the competition anymore. Perhaps more controversially though, Modi is known for an ideology called Hindu nationalism or Hindutva. Hindutva envisions India as a Hindu or Dharmic civilization. Religions born in India, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism, deserve to be protected, preserved, and even promoted by the state according to Hindutva. Some Hindutva supporters extend that state support to more Indic variants of Christianity and Islam. Nonetheless, Hindutva is often criticized for marginalizing non-Indic religions. And one can understand where those critiques come from. But one thing often ignored is that Hindutva has also quieted older fault lines, particularly caste and regional rivalries. By elevating a shared Hindu or Dharmic identity, it has redirected political energy away from zero-sum caste competition. And when we look at the data, communal riots have been sharply down during Modi's terms. So there is a genuine data case that Hindutva reduces violence in India. Either way, the government has been religion blind in its delivery of welfare and law, even attempting to introduce a united secular code instead of the current religious legal codes. India is very complex, so watch my other videos to understand some of this. What makes Hindutva important is that it gives India a unitary vision rooted in something older than the constitution, in stories, ideas, and values that predate 1947. It reminds India that it wasn't invented, it was inherited. Hindutva reinforces this idea that India is not just a country, it is a civilization. And I think that adds some special masala when we see successes like India landing on the moon, its rising status in geopolitics, or even winning a cricket World Cup. Look, India has many things still holding it back. Bureaucracy, inequality, caste and communal politics, and a lot more. But something fundamentally has shifted. It's no longer content with moral victories. It wants material ones. India has realized that diversity may be its beauty, but unity is its power. For millennia, China looked to India for inspiration. The message of Buddhism transformed Chinese civilization. Chinese scholars would travel to India to learn from the land of Dharma. I think now we have a moment where history might rhyme. As India taught China spirituality, now may be the moment where China teaches India how to industrialize, how to harness materials. And yes, perhaps India should learn from a communist country on how to do capitalism.